My name is Jennifer Garland. I'm the acting director of Rare Books and Special Collections, and it is a treat to invite Jacquelyn Sundberg to welcome her to the microphone today to present her curatorial conversation, What's in the Cards. And for the people in the room, on your way up to the fourth floor today, you would have walked by this excellent exhibition that has Jacquelyn's special creative touch, and you'll see a bit more of that through this presentation and in the in-person tour. For those of you watching from home, welcome. We have about 25 people here in the room. You're in good company. A little bit of housekeeping. People at home, please include all of your questions in the chat. Jacquelyn will be responding to them in due course on the laptop. People in the room, there'll be a moment for Q&A at the end. And of course, as usual, we'll get you to speak into the microphone or repeat your question through Jacquelyn or myself. So as I say, Jacquelyn is normally the one introducing these events. And I have some statistics here. In 2023, she planned, including inviting the speakers, promotion, hosting, moderating the Q&A, presented at, edited the videos, disseminated all of the event recordings to YouTube and email for a total of 31 events. So you've seen her, if you've been to any of our events in the last year, the last couple of years, you've seen her in one way or another through your email box or on the screen. You've interacted with her in one of these ways, but how much do we know about our Jacquelyn Sundberg? First of all, curatorial responsibility. She's a curator in Rare Books and Special Collections, where she's responsible for our cookbook collection and our children's book collection, and recently our puppet collection. And you see a theme here. She is a creative and talented colleague, and she brings these collections to life. She holds 2 McGill master's degrees. More recently, her Master's of Library and Information Studies, and before that, a master's degree in English literature. She's a maker. She's a talented knitter. You've seen her at many of her knitting events. And a seamstress. She's also a gardener, and I'm not sure to what extent, but she does this at home, but I've seen her gardening here in our staff plot, and it's been super exciting. And these are just 3 of Jacquelyn's talents that I know about. I'm really looking forward, Jacquelyn, to hearing your presentation today. Please, everyone, welcome Jacquelyn Sundberg to the microphone.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's always nice to hear yourself praised by others. Yes, so that's me. I do have many hobbies, I have to say, some at which I'm better than others. But before I get started, I did want to take a moment and reflect on where we in the room are joining everyone from. And that's here on the McGill University's downtown campus in the McLennan Library building. And it's located on land that has long served as a place of meeting and exchange of ideas amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. And we acknowledge and thank these diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this place that we now gather on. And really, it's a place of gathering in many senses. It's a place for exchange of ideas, or it's a place to express protest. As you have also noticed, as you came in, there's an unmissable encampment outside our building at the moment. So I want to take a moment and just think about this place, because the topic of my exhibition is very light, but it's coming to you from a place that has been marked and touched by a lot of struggles and a lot of exchange of difficult ideas. And I do see we have some comments in the chat, which is great. Some people are letting us know where they're tuning in from, which is always fun. We have some people from Alberta, Australia. I don't know what time it is there, but thank you for joining us. And some people from the States as well. So thanks for tuning in. I am going to tell you a little bit about this exhibition. And as Jennifer said, I so very often organize these events. So it really is fun to be here in a different capacity to talk about the art of play and games in this current exhibition. I have always loved play. And that's a kind of a strange sentence that needs to be exploded a bit, but Jennifer did mention I have 2 master's degrees, and my first, I really was fascinated with the concept of play in poetry, the way that poets play with language and interpret that, and the levity and the intricacy that you can develop in poetry, and really with this concept of play in modernist poets like Marianne Moore. So that's a long ancient history. Fast forward to a little more contemporary. I really do enjoy the concept of exploring the idea of the concept of play and how that fits into our environment here, an academic library, which is full of rich, eclectic, and very unique collections, including this image that you see on screen. Today, I'm going to share how this exhibition, which is so rich in color, history of graphic design as well, how it came to be. I'll share too what some of the content is that didn't make the cases. So you'll see it here today only. And I will share too a little bit about actually playing a game, because what would an exhibition about playing games be if you couldn't actually play something? So we will have a game at the end of my little talk. So you'll need a smartphone or a computer, or a piece of pen and paper if you're not so inclined. If you're here in the room, you can use paper. But we'll have a short game and you can test your trivia skills. Be prepared. Every exhibition does begin with an idea. And this one has its roots in a few years ago when I started to pursue this interest in play and play in academic libraries in particular through a grant project, which was a successful project called Play at the Library, which I conceived of and then threw at my colleagues and went away on mat leave. But it was still there when I came back, and it supported outreach projects and initiatives, events, and the like from 2020 to 2022. We actually did create our own games. You can see an image from one of them. This is one of the photos from our archives, a woman named Amy Redpath-Roddick, who, if you judge by her hat, you judge correctly that she did not live at a time of cell phones. However, we did use her image and her character in a virtual game. We did create 4 games, escape room games, a trivia game called Quiz That So. And we experimented with board games, and we even made our own card game, which is called Moments in Time. You can see it in the bottom right. You can also see that one in the exhibition, or if you're so inclined, you can buy your own copy. We still have some left, although we're getting to the end of our stock. I designed it, so I'm biased, but I think it is quite fun and replayable. We also experimented with what play means, whether it's pushing play on a podcast, turning the pages of an interactive or movable book, or dealing out a hand of cards, or solitaire for a test of your own patience. Through events, talks, and projects, we explored where play can fit at the library and how it can bring life and learning to collections and make them more accessible. Because we are on the 4th floor of a building that's quite imposing, and so we don't get a lot of walk-ins, but the collections are open to everyone. And everyone can come in. This is a cultural resource that's here for you. And play is one of the ways that you can make these collections more accessible to people, more approachable. So through the course of the explorations for those games, I really did scour our collections for historical games, for the context of the history of games. So I looked for board games, I looked for card games, I looked for word games, riddles, puzzles, logic puzzles, and the like. And I found a lot, unsurprisingly, perhaps. They can come in many different forms. We also have, which you'll see some of in this exhibition, a playing card collection, which includes cards, historical cards donated by various donors over the years. Games can be found in many of our other named or topical collections as well. Some are in book form, like this one, which is not surprising. We have quite a few like this. This item is from the Sheila Burke Rare Children's Collection, and it's illustrated by Kate Greenaway. She was a noted illustrator from that golden era of children's books in the Victorian age. And this one actually gives you instructions for basic street and garden games, like ball and tops, for instance. Kate Greenaway had a very recognizable style. She's well known for pastoral scenes, flowers, this idyllic depiction of childhood that you can see here. So you won't see this book in the cases, but if you really do need full instructions on how to play ball or tops or any of these games, you're welcome to come in and consult this one in the reading room. I chose to focus instead on tabletop games. So that's board games or board games with a board, or like chess or Go, or those types of things that are played with pieces, and also on card games, which is why Greenaway's book is still on the shelf and not in the exhibition downstairs. Other games are in the collections in unexpected places, perhaps. We have, for instance, a deck of tarot cards that is a part of our Napoleon collection, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for this exhibition, I used three themes, three main categories. First was educational games, because so many early historical games were very educational and perhaps not so much fun. If you've tried them, maybe you know what I mean. Second, tabletop games. And of course, there's overlap between educational and cards. And the third category, sorry, which is cards. So we have educational games, tabletop games, and cards. We have three cases downstairs. So I use those three pillars. And in all three categories, you can see innovation and advances in printing techniques as you look back through history at these games, and also in design. From the earliest cards that were hand painted or hand carved, in the case of tiles, to 20th century Hasbro games, or the ones that you can find at shops in the plateau or in your neighborhood today. The games and cases were richly colorful whenever they could be. And with very few exceptions, of course, there are some in the exhibition that could really use a redesign boost. One in particular is an educational game about the life of Marguerite Bourgeois. It needs a revamp to be relevant in this day and age. It's from the early 20th century, and it's not very attractive, but very educational. So whether these games are moral, and yes, a question from Online Crowd, are the online games still available? Yes, they are. We can send links in the follow-up. But coming back to the topic of the day, where was I? Marguerite Bourgeois, of course, she didn't have to deal with Zoom. So whether they're educational, moral, or purely for entertainment, all the games provide a rich history of the way that people interacted socially and the way that those patterns changed over time. And the popularity of things is really interesting to track. And it's not something I can talk all about today, but it's something that if you're interested in the history of games, it's really quite fascinating to go deeper. So all of these games do have the potential to unite players or to divide them. Playing together can build common interest. It can edify, it can entertain, or in the case of my in-laws, for instance, my in-laws family, it can be a bottomless source for argument over the rules and how they're interpreted and how they are applied and whether someone has cheated or not. And I'm hearing chuckles and that you can relate, because people take these games and historically have taken these games very seriously. And in the 19th century, where you'll see a lot of these items come from, board games and playing cards were really excellent showpieces of the innovations in printing and manufacturing that were taking place, and also paper. So advances in color printing took off, and the market for printed objects like cards in particular and game boards also really exploded. This game, for instance, was first published in 1810. It was printed in color from engraved plates. Then it would have been hand colored, cut, and mounted onto linen backing for a foldable and very durable game board. Also one with a smaller footprint than the contemporary boxes, which are enormous. This edition that you'll see in the cases downstairs and on screen is actually a facsimile edition that was created in the 1980s. But it is very typical of games from the 1800s that are called a race to the center, which you can see why. Players, it was very common at the time, and they were often very moral and instructive, with the player landing on moral perils or pitfalls or tests that would make them backslide, or sometimes positive things that would make them advance around the spiral faster. This one, it was definitely a game of moral improvement. You can see how it folds a little bit, and then it would fold and go into the slipcase on the left, along with instructions usually, or else the instructions would be on the game board itself. But many games, it was published in London, and it was meant to promote, quote, patience and resignation through play, which is, you have to develop those things, play is a good way to do it, I suppose. And this one was produced, the facsimile edition, by the Friends of the Osborne and Lillian H. Smith collections at the Toronto Public Library, where they have an extensive children's collection. So there are other collections that have far more games than we do. One in particular I'll point out is the Lyman collection, which is housed at Brown University. And if you're interested in the topic, that's one collection to explore. Now, these games, like I said, were often very moral. It also has the complications of the societal history at the time, where there were laws that were passed against gambling in particular. And games that therefore required dice were frowned upon. So there was an alternative to dice, which is a teetotum that you can see here. And many games called for that because you didn't want to make the faux pas of being a publisher and encouraging gambling or vice by selling a game that was too close to the line, by encouraging the use of dice. The same sort of restrictions applied to gambling card games as well at the time. Another example of these early educational tabletop games is this one that you'll see a much better image of downstairs in the cases. This one is a geographical game, Bull's Geographical Game of the World, in a new and complete elegant tour through known parts thereof, laid down on Mercator's projection. And I include this one in particular because it's once again a turn-based race game, but it's a good example of the transition that took place because a lot of early map printers transitioned to creating game boards. They had the same technological requirements. They needed large scale engraved plates, and they also had the ability to color these larger scale maps. So a lot of them began to produce game boards and also jigsaw puzzles. Many of the earliest jigsaw puzzles were called dissected maps, and they had the express purpose of instructing puzzlers in geography as they reassembled the map. This one takes players through the world as it was known at the time, so you get an experience of the grand tour as people might have taken it at the time in 1797. So it is definitely Eurocentric. Keep that in mind if you are looking in the case and you're missing the destinations you'd like to be there. They're the ones that they knew and went to in 1797 from London. So these ones, it would fold down and fit into that slipcase. This one has the instructions integrated on the game board itself. It's much slimmer than, well, there's an example of an early jigsaw puzzle that's also downstairs. This one actually does show a story rather than a map, but it was called a dissected map at the time. The next case, or main theme and category, is cards, of course. They were a lot more portable than game boards and also a lot more popular. They emerged earlier as well. Cards printed from wood blocks existed in China in the 9th century during the Tang Dynasty, and they were easily portable, an easily portable amusement that then spread west through trade routes and took on new patterns, new suits, inspired new games as it traveled through Persia, Egypt, and eventually into Europe in the 13th century. And there are so many card games that exist, so many ways of playing with 52 cards. I only ever managed to keep the rules of 3 games in my head at any given time, which is cribbage, go fish, and solitaire, if anyone can relate. Every other game needs a refresher. The rules just don't stay in my head. And I think I'm not alone, because another thing that emerged with the explosion of cards is rule books and handbooks on how to play cards. And this really took off in the 18th and 19th century. Many games endure today and are still played today, and their rule books are well documented, and some are even digitized and now easily accessible if you want to refer to them and see how bridge was played or how whist was played. Hoyle was the man who wrote the book. So according to Hoyle was the reference that every party would have. He was the name. We have another one that's in the exhibition, actually, you'll see downstairs. It's also digitized. This one is called Dick's Games of Patience, or Solitaire with Cards. And if you do like solitaire, let me introduce you to 64 new kinds of solitaire. It'll keep you busy for a while. I should have advertised this one during the pandemic when everyone was at home playing games alone. It's actually quite fun. I played through a couple and learned the different varieties. So it is digitized. I've laid out one arrangement, which some of them are quite lovely. You can see one pictured here. It'll give you the diagram of how to set up your game of patience. So if you want to test your patience, there's 64 new ways to do it. This transitions really to more contemporary card decks and the focus on cards in particular. Contemporary decks do use the recognized, the most use the French suits, which are clubs, diamonds, hearts, and spades in a standard pack, which is now 52 cards. But cards are really well adapted to educational games and other story games as well, or even custom or novelty decks. The possible games are very many, and they really are endlessly stimulating because they combine luck, skill, and team play and strategy. You can combine all of those things in cards. And so in some ways, with every new hand, there's a fresh opportunity to engage with the people around you. The art of the cards is therefore not only in the printing and design, which you could see a selection of, but of course in the playing and in the reading of your opponents. So I included a selection of historical playing cards from our collection, most dating from the 19th and 20th centuries, although we do have earlier examples. Most of those are hand painted. And I have a couple here actually that you can look at if you are in the room, some of the earlier examples. But we do have a selection that have been digitized, either in selections from the larger decks or the decks in their entirety. And I have to thank my colleague, Greg Houston, who is the head of our digitization lab and I think a digital wizard in his own right. He helped get this process along, and he also is on board when I come to him with ideas like, I'm making an exhibition about cards, make me a game that people can play on the touch table, because I want something interactive so that people can interact with the cards in more than simply looking at them. So he helps with the digital touch table downstairs, so you can zoom in and see these cards and some of the board games in much more detail. If you go, for those of you here in person, you can head downstairs and we'll do that after the talk. But I do highlight a couple of my favorites here. And one of those, the first is these. I have one example with me to give you a sense of scale. They're Hindu playing cards. And these are a facsimile reproduction that was made in the 1920s, but they're made using traditional techniques. They embody the designs and principles that were used in India for centuries, and each suit, there are 10, has the numbers 1 through, I think it's 1 through 9 or 1 through 10, and then they have 2 court cards as well. And in this deck, all of the court cards represent one of the incarnations of the god Vishnu. The suit shown here is Matsya, the fish. And in that incarnation, Vishnu towed the ship containing Manu to safety from the flood, saving Noah and his family and the animals. And so there are 10 different suits, all showing a different incarnation and personification of the deity. They're really quite interesting in terms of technique. They're made using layers of cloth that are pasted together and then coated with a layer of plastic clay or chalk and then hand painted and sealed afterwards with a resinous substance that's extracted from tamarind seeds. So it's one, in this case, we know a lot about how these were produced. That's not true for all of the cards in the collection, but those ones in particular, they were a gift to McGill in 1926 by a ghost. And the donor did a lot of research about them. So we know more about it because of the person who originally collected them. Second, I want to highlight this lovely lady, the Queen of Hearts. She's quite graciously clad, and she's a good example of how designers use decks of cards to showcase fashions of their nation. So the cards in our collection we have from all over Europe. There's quite a few Italian, Austrian, French in particular, German as well. But this one I highlight, and you can see her full outfit, I think, downstairs on the touch table, as a good example of that. And you can see that trend in the court cards in many of the different decks. Third, I want to highlight these ones. It's a little difficult to read, but it's called circular playing cards. And they are, in fact, circular. They're round. They're about this big. And the box that they come in is square, and it houses a double deck. A lot of games required a double deck to play. including many of those solitaire games. So be prepared, you might need 2 decks of cards. But I don't know, I've never played with round cards. I don't know if anyone has. I don't know if they'd be harder or easier to shuffle. No, I didn't. They're hard to hold. There you go. So the square ones won out. But there are some circular ones that persisted into the 20th century. These ones I didn't test because they're actually still in their original wrappers, and definitely was not going to unwrap them just for my own curiosity. But they're fascinating, and you can see some more examples downstairs. Last, I highlight a deck of souvenir cards. This one has, that's the back image that you see, but on the front are various scenes of Canadian iconic scenes and landscapes and cityscapes. And I think a show of hands is needed. How many people have a souvenir deck of cards kicking around at the cottage or in a drawer? Yes, most people do. You can show your hands on Zoom too if you'd like. I know I definitely have had some over the years. It proved a relatively effective promotional method. And I had one that was an ineffective deck of cards for playing with because it was every card had a picture of a piece, different kind of cheese, along with information facts. And so every time you would play, I'd just get hungry and I would read and I would miss my turn. So I got rid of those, but overall, the promotional and souvenir decks are quite interesting also as markers of the place that they were produced and the time that they were produced. I'm also going to highlight 2 other decks of cards that are more recent. And on the right of the screen, you'll see unstacking the deck. And I have the case here actually. So the double cases are not quite as nice as they were in the 19th and early 20th century. It's still beautiful, but if you see the full case downstairs, you'll understand what I mean. The mechanism is now cardboard boxes as opposed to a beautiful leather carrying case for your cards. But this one is a beautiful deck. It's a work of scholarship and it's a work of art. And it was, it's a double deck because each deck, one has an image of an architect and the other has a blurb of information about her life. And what did this professor, Lisa Landrum, who created this she's a professor of architecture in Manitoba, and she created this to really showcase the women in architectural history, which is a historically male-dominated field. She wanted to make strides towards inclusion and diversity. And it's a really interesting deck of cards to read through. Perhaps I would have the same problem with the cheese deck. I would read and not play, but it's worth flipping through. Also because they're beautifully decorated with an artwork entitled Breath of Life by an Ojibwe artist, Jackie Verse. And a quote from the artist: "Encircled by blossoms of Mother Earth, these women, with dragonflies rising from their breath, evoke the many generations of Turtle Island's first women who did not need university degrees to build a harmonious world." Unquote. It's a beautiful example of scholarship, art, and play mixed together. And on the left of the screen, you can see our game, Moments in Time, which I conceived and designed with a team of talented students in 2021 and 2. It's a timeline game, which allows us to illustrate moments in time with items, prints, and images from our library collections. Players must try to place their event cards at the correct moment in time, building a timeline collaboratively, but still competitively. The first person to place all their cards correctly wins. And this is the essential concept of the game I'll make you play in a minute. But before we switch to that, I want to highlight 2 things that didn't, or the final thing that didn't get included. And that's, as I mentioned, tarot cards, which is an entirely interesting swathe of card history on its own. This deck is from our Napoleon collection, and it does picture the Emperor Napoleon himself on the back. That's the back of the cards. And on the front, it's hand painted. It would have been printed and then hand painted. In tarot, if I refer back to my notes, there's a really rich history of design in tarot in particular that came out of Italy. And there's normally 4 suits: swords, batons, cups, and coins. And they originated in Italy in the mid-15th century. They were later used for divination purposes, but originally they were for playing games. They were game decks. And this one, as my colleague Anne-Marie Holland, who's the curator of our Napoleon collection, she pointed out we have one. So even though it didn't make the cut in that tarot was too deep an area to dive into for this exhibition, I wanted to include it because it's an interesting object. So yes, now I am going to challenge all of you to play along, join the quiz. You can do so one of two ways. You can either go to slido.com, that's slido.com, and enter this number. Or if you are close enough to the screen, you can scan the QR code. Or it works from back there? Okay, there you go, from the back of the room. So I'll give you a little bit of time to get into the game. I created a mini game based on the gameplay of Moments in Time, the chronological one. So which came first, this or this? It's quite simple in mechanics. And while I do that, I want to say a few thank yous to others who helped make this exhibition come to be. One is my student employee who sadly, but really happily just graduated, but it means that I can no longer keep her as an employee. Labiba Faiza did a lot of work in prepping and helping with this exhibition, getting the labels ready and proofreading and doing materials for PR and graphics and the like. So a big thank you to Labiba. I did thank Greg, but I will do so again because his help is always invaluable. And also a thank you to the Ulster collection of the Library of the History of Medicine. We borrowed one item from them for this game, for this exhibition, which is a game called Fizzogs, and it is very odd. It's fully digitized, but you will see it downstairs. I'll send the link out in the follow-ups because it's worth seeing for yourself. But essentially the concept of the game is that there's face cards with 3 slots where the eyes, nose, and mouth are. And you have to build different facial expressions using small photos that you slot into the different expression places. It's strange and a little bit uncomfortable, and it feels like profiling a little bit, but it's fascinating. It's from the 1940s. So you have to build things like anger or distrust or this with gendered specific facial expressions. So thank you to Osler for lending us one of their curiosities. They have other games in their collection as well, but I chose that one to add some interest to our tabletop games case. Okay, so I see a good number of people, so we're going to start off. And the first question, which card game was invented first? Bridge or whist? You don't get a lot of time, so just go with your instincts. 11 seconds. Okay, and we get instant results, everyone. If you weren't quite fast enough, everyone almost agrees whist is older. And everyone almost unanimously is not right. It was bridge. Bridge was invented in the early 16th century, and whist came about in 1728. Yeah. When was the first jigsaw puzzle invented? Multiple choice, because that's a hard one. Oh, we once again have consensus. So 1687 is the top guess. And the right answer is later than everyone thinks. 1762. And that once again is these early dissected maps. This is a bit misleading because this image is contemporary. So, but clearly you all saw through that. So it's good. Which came first, the first Canadian National Park or the first modern Olympic Games? Ah, that's a good guess. We'll see in a minute. National Park is the top guess. And you're right. Ding, 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 ding. Anyone want to take a stab at the year for the National Park? It was close. Yeah, it was 1885. And the games were as 1896, so not too much later. And when was the letter J added to the English alphabet? I chose J on purpose. My name is Jacquelyn after all, as and my siblings' names all start with J. It's an important letter in the Deal clan. 1593 is the top guess. However, it is not correct. 1524. Earlier than everyone thinks. This one, more contemporary history. I'll give you a hint. They are both 20th century in case you didn't guess that. You all know this one well. Okay, we should stick to 20th century questions. Monopoly did come first. It was 1935. Clue came out first in the UK as Cluedo in the 1940s. I think it was 1943 in the UK and then 1944 worldwide. So play of a different kind, which came first, the invention of basketball or the formation of the NHL, National Hockey League. I mean, I'm nodding a lot. Oh, it's fine. You're welcome to call them out. You can also use pen and paper if you prefer. I brought some out. And it is basketball. You all are right. They both have a nice McGill connection, though. We like to claim the creator of basketball and hockey also. Proud McGill sports history, which came first. The invention of margarine, very related things on this one. I wanted to put two things that were very similar, only in color. Margarine or Audubon's, John James Audubon's Birds of North America. I'll give you a hint, they are both in the 19th century. You already got that part. And y'all are right. Audubon was 1838 and margarine wasn't invented until 1869, which is still very early, actually. I was surprised when I learned about that. And when was the crossword puzzle invented? You all are wrong. It was 1917. Yeah, it's much later than one would think. And if you buy or have a deck, you can read up about the crossword puzzle in Moments in Time. That's where some of these, that's what the cards look like for Moments in Time. It was a specific man who created these. It's great. I'm thankful for him. Which came first? Back to Canadian culture, the formation of the Group of Seven, or Newfoundland joining Canada. So everyone agrees. And you're all right, of course. It was definitely the Group of Seven. Anyone know the era? Decade? 1920. Yeah. And Newfoundland, I would have gotten this wrong if I was not creating the quiz. The year that Newfoundland joined Canada was 1949. Yeah, much later than everyone expects. So Montreal local question. Which came first, Expo or the introduction of the contraceptive pill? Good piece of female medical history there. These are actually cufflinks that feature the pill. They're from the Ozer collection of the history of consent. And that's to scale size of the original pill. Oh, it's pretty even split. But the majority has it. Yes, it was the contraceptive pill, but it's not that much earlier. It was 1960. So the last question, which came first, card games, including tile games, or chess? And general consensus is correct. Yes, chess and Go, these types of tabletop strategy games were the earliest games that we have documented. So chess was around the 6th century, and card games and tile games emerged a little bit later in the 9th century. So thank you for playing along, everyone. I think, yes. Oh my goodness. Congratulations, Victoria Dickinson. No, you didn't, but yeah, well, actually, a lot of you got 8 out of 11. So well done. Yeah, we have a lot of people who tied. So Victoria, Robin, John, Cindy, and Julia, you all tied, but Victoria was the fastest. Speedy fingers on your mobile. So thank you all for playing. Now, if you do have questions, I can take questions, and then after question period, we will head downstairs and you can browse through the exhibition cases. I will put in one final plug. On your way out, there is an exhibition in our reading room currently of the letters and correspondence of Voltaire, curated by my colleague Anne-Marie. And I pointed out because it will be disappearing soon for something new. So if you want to take some time and browse through that, you are more than welcome. Questions? Yes, there's a couple from here. There's a question from the Zoom crowd. Where can you buy Moments in Time? Yes, you can. You can buy it through the James bookstore. We are low in stock, so it might not be in stock. We're reprinting it at the moment, so it will be available again. We have a few here in our reading room as well. And you can call us and order it, and we will send it in the mail. Any other questions? Yeah. From the room. I'll repeat it for the microphone. Ooh, that is a question beyond my expertise. It's a great question, though. As a person who plays video games myself, yes, most of them are digital. I don't have physical games except for 2. Legend of Zelda. It was worth it. But it's a good question. It's one that our mandate doesn't really cover. We look backwards. There are collections that are doing a lot more forward-looking. And it's actually very interesting to talk to people who work, say, for Ubisoft. They have teams of librarians and archivists and knowledge management people to store not only the games, but their enormous library of assets that are created for every project. So in some ways, the field-specific and the industry-specific practitioners are some of the best and leading the way in terms of preserving their material. But libraries are a little further behind. Often we have the circulation of games is done more in public libraries than it is in academic ones. It's increasingly true that some academic libraries specialize in game collections. Unfortunately, we're not one of them. We have some games that circulate, but it's not been a focus here at McGill. So I can't give you a perfect answer, but Ubisoft is a fun librarian, archivist person to talk to if ever you manage to meet one. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, it's a great question. The question is, did I dig into it all? Who was playing these games and the circulation? To be honest, no, it wasn't as much an interest. I was looking more at the games themselves, the aesthetics of them, the art and the design. The only aspect of play that I really got into a little bit was in the rule books and how widely published some of those rule books were. And then there is an entire field of scholarship about the history of play. It's not something I delved into in great detail for this exhibition, but it's one of the fascinating aspects if you start to read about it. And it's one for further study, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's it. We have one more question. Yeah. Pardon? Yes, the teetotum. Yes. That is a great theory. I don't know, but it does. A teetotaler or teetotum, it's similar. I don't know if the teetotum, the origin of it might actually predate dice. The spinning top. Victoria, do you know?
She looked it up when you were
talking. Okay. Okay. Knowledge from the crowd. Oh. Okay, so that in summary, Victoria looked it up, and apparently teetotum is also the name for a working man's club where they did not serve alcohol. So there could be a relationship between teetotaling and teetotums from that era where vice was very much eschewed. We have 2 more comments. Yeah.
The Romans used dice.
Yes.
It's to see 4-sided dice in different not just 6-sided dice, they have different. And this type of dice, this is still used in Germany.
Okay,
But they, instead of putting dots on it, they put the words on it. You
yeah,
can still spin it, and it's still.
right. So the comment was that Romans used dice, so that definitely is old, and that teetotums are still used in Germany,
Yeah.
but sometimes with images instead of pips,
Yeah,
like
words.
these. Words as well. Right, it makes me think of a dreidel as well. Speaking of things that spin. Okay, I think, oh, we have two more. Everyone wants to say something. Yes. Oh, okay. Oh, yes, it is the one of them is the Lyman collection. It's housed at Brown University. And there's actually a beautifully published like coffee table book that you can purchase of some of these beautiful board games from that collection and from that Victorian era, which was really the heyday for board games. And yes, I did see that and failed to answer. So thank you for everyone on the chat who tuned in and on the Zoom who tuned in. We're going to end the Zoom now, and I'll invite everyone here in person. We can go downstairs. You can ask any questions you'd like about the cases.